Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I cannot even begin to describe the pleasure and honor it is for me to be here, and I think I am speaking for all the scholars as well. We are coming from England, but we are also coming from very different parts of the world, mostly Latin America, Africa, India, Jordan. So we're used to warmer weathers, so if our voice does quiver, please bear with us, although I think we're going to be fine with the heating. That said, let me talk to you a little bit about the Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust. The Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust is a trust that funds scholarships for graduate students at the University of Oxford. These are full scholarships, but it also has a leadership program. So within our year in Oxford, we have a special program in which we have special seminars, we have special events, we learn different skills. And the idea of the trust is to get students from all over the world, specifically from developing economies, to go to Oxford and develop leadership skills. Now, we wouldn't be here, of course, if it wasn't for the University of Oxford that has been able to increase our endowment. And we are very lucky to have with us today the Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Louise Richardson. It is a real honor for us to have her here. And without further ado, I'm just going to give the floor to her for her to share some introductory words with us.
Thank you very much, Sergio. The pleasure and the honor is entirely mine. Thank you all for coming. The Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust is a wonderful, Oxford is a wonderful university, and there are many wonderful things about it, and one of the most wonderful is the Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust. Sergio has described what is involved, but what this does is not only transform the lives of the scholars who come to Oxford, it also transforms Oxford by enriching the rest of the university with the perspectives of these dynamic young people. And thirdly, it transforms the countries they go back to with the skills, with the education and additional training that they've received. Now, this whole initiative was the brainchild of a wonderful man, George Weidenfeld, the centenary of whose birth we'll be celebrating next September. He was born in Vienna in September 1919. And he was utterly committed to education, and it was his brainchild that created this trust. But it is the next generation of philanthropists who've ensured that the trust continues. And I would have to recognize Andre Hoffmann, who has carried on the Weidenfeld Trust, and without whom none of us would be here today. So thank you from all of us, Andre. So we live in deeply uncertain times, and in many countries, not least my own, there is at the moment a complete dearth of leadership. So it has never been more important that we have highly educated, smart, ethical, committed young people running our governments, our NGOs, our businesses, and ensuring a sustainable future for all of us. Over the years, the Trust has educated 276 scholars from 72 countries, and they work in 49 departments across the university. So a diverse range of students studying a diverse range of subjects. Already we have alumni of the Trust are making a difference in their home country. We have the first ever female postgraduate from Ethiopia, is a graduate and is back in her home country working on democratic reform. We have the first female postgraduate from Afghanistan, who's now back in her own country working on building civil society. We have a young doctor who was working at the forefront of the Ebola crisis, another working in the Palestinian refugee camps. So more important than these names and indeed these numbers, this afternoon we're going to hear from some of the scholars themselves. And there's no greater testament to the importance of this scholarship than the voices of the beneficiaries themselves. So I know we're in for a wonderful afternoon, and it could not be a more perfect setting because it is precisely the work of these young people, of this generation, which will enhance the probability of our actually meeting the sustainable development goals we've set for ourselves. So back to you, Sergio. I'm going to hand it back to you, but I hope you all enjoy the afternoon.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now we are going to show you a short video of what we are all about. In the video, you're going to see a couple of our scholars that couldn't be with us today, but whose work is still worth sharing. Some of them have been mentioned already by Professor Richardson.
And the WHT scholarship is one that I cherish up to date because first, it influenced my career path. It reinforced my desire to contribute to the socio-economic development of the African continent.
There have been such fundamental changes, positive changes in the way not only that I view myself, but also in the way that my life trajectory has changed, that I attribute directly to my time as a Weidenfeld and Hoffman scholar.
My experience in Oxford was really enriched by the supplementary learning that was part of the leadership program, be it the discussions about political philosophy or exposures to really world-class thinkers that would come and speak to us.
In the company of such stellar, like-minded people who were very passionate about their different areas of interest, I somehow cultivated within me the inner strength to follow my passion, to come back to my roots in India and try to create an impact and balance environmental conservation with sustainable development and just follow my heart and put my mind where my heart is.
The education and the training that I received helped me design, for example, a new governance system for the world's largest rural anti-poverty program, targeting more than 177 million citizens with services that will now be more free of corruption, more effectively delivered, and more empathetically served.
Every day I need to talk to a range of stakeholders, to communicate with investors, to talk to scientists, to talk to NGOs, and to reach out to people across the continents and countries. And these are the most important skills that I obtained during my time in Oxford and being a WHT scholar.
We all had come from countries that were in transition. We had a lot in common in terms of our experiences, but also our concerns and ambitions for our countries. And it made us feel like part of a tribe, a community in Oxford.
It created strong bonds among scholars, and these are bonds that will last a lifetime. And anytime I face challenges, professional challenges for instance, I would call my fellow scholars, we would discuss and encourage each other.
To me personally, the leadership program gave me more than the actual education in Oxford. And I know I shouldn't say that, but I stand by it. I learned more and I became a better person because I've been a part of WHT leadership program.
I was just joking with Professor Richardson. I was asking her not to revoke Irina's PhD degree after what she said in the video. But I think this, her idea really goes to the core of what this program is for us, and it really speaks highly of the program. the fact that even within the context of the University of Oxford, it still stands out, and it's a huge part of our year, and it really is the highlight of our year, both educational and personal. That said, we are now going to proceed with the short talks that we have prepared for today. We have decided to divide these short talks in 3 different panels, with 3 different topics that we believe are at the core of what the Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Trust represents, and that also overlap with the ethos of Davos and the World Economic Forum, and of course the SDG, and we are very happy and lucky to be here today. So we thank the SDG tent for hosting us. We're going to start, our 3 panels are going to be sustainability, education, and innovation. Our first panel is going to be sustainability, so please join me in welcoming June Samo from Kenya, Kapil Yadav from India, and Simonetta Spalieri from Venezuela.
So thank you, Sergio, for that introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. Yes. I'm June, and I'm here to bring you some interesting stories from sunny Kenya. And I must say that I'm very privileged and honored to be here today. So before I begin, I'd like to start with 2 questions. So how many of you have had to wake up very early in the wee hours of the morning to trek for 1 kilometer to fetch water for your morning shower? You don't have to answer that. Then the second question. How many of you have failed to see a trickle or even a droplet of water coming from your taps despite religiously paying your water bills? You don't have to answer that either. So today I'm here to talk to you about my journey with water and what I discovered about non-revenue water, a menace that is compromising sustainability and compromising our ability to achieve SDG 6. So the 2 questions that I asked you reflect my life experiences with water, and particularly the last one. I lived in Nairobi, and for the longest time, for weeks on end, we never used to have water. We always used to pay our bills on time, but there was just never any water coming out of the taps. And to make matters worse, there were no droughts to explain this phenomena, so we kept on asking ourselves what exactly was the problem. So later on, when I started working in the water sector, is when I realized that there's something known as non-revenue water that is actually the underlying cause to these shortages. So for those of you who've never heard of non-revenue water, it sounds like some sort of menacing, fictitious character from some sort of suspense drama, and it sounds ridiculous. But let me explain it to you. So non-revenue water is the water that's produced by a water utility and lost even before it gets to the consumer. And it's lost through pipe leakages and also theft. So in Kenya, we have a non-revenue of 43%. That's losing 43% of your water. And just to put this into perspective, that's Kenya loses about $76 million annually to this phenomenon. That's a lot of money. And to make matters even worse, Kenya is part of the unlucky 8.3% of countries that are classified as severely water scarce and severely arid. So we can't go around using this kind of water. But what's interesting about this particular problem is that it just doesn't affect Kenya and the developing world. It's also a phenomenon for developed countries. So and why it's so menacing is because the pipes are under the ground. You don't see them. So you don't realize that it's happening. Out of sight, out of mind. I believe that if Kenya and the world are actually set on achieving SDG 6 by 2030, this problem has to be curbed. So there are some initiatives that have started to take place. We have performance-based contracting, which has gotten some success in Malaysia and in Bahamas. At least non-revenue rates have gone down. We also have public-private partnerships, which are being initiated. They're in their nascent stages. But for me, what I feel is something that can really make a change is grooming visionary leaders. And it's a theme that you're going to hear a lot. But for non-revenue water, it actually worked. So in Phnom Penh, in Cambodia, we have Exxon Chan, one of the most notable names in the water sector. This man and his team took non-revenue water in that particular utility from 76%, losing 76% of your water, to 6%. This is one of the lowest rates globally, only after Singapore, which has 4% non-revenue water. That's really low. It's very hard for you to achieve such percentages, but it's possible with the right leadership. So what am I saying here? Water matters, and it matters a lot, particularly in this day and age when climate change is threatening sustainability. And I feel that it is up to us as future leaders and up to you as leaders to actually tackle this problem, to look at it seriously, not to make it a problem that's out of sight, out of mind, but to find ways of reducing it. Thank you so much.
Hello, it is a privilege to be here, and I'm going to talk about plastic pollution in rural India and share a few lessons which I've picked up. What do you think when you think of the word India? To me, I think of colors, the Himalayas, then the rivers flowing towards the ocean, and then the biodiversity, the tiger, the elephant, all those birds. And those hundreds and thousands of lakes and ponds across this landscape. Sadly, some of the colors which now come to my mind when I think of India come from littering of plastic everywhere in this country. And I used to work with a company producing plastic, and I was into mountaineering. So I wanted to do something about this, and I thought it's an environmental issue. So I was trekking in a Himalayan village in India, and I saw this one guy who was picking plastic. He was a waste picker, so someone who has a bag and would just go to dustbins with bare hands, would collect plastic bottles, would go to hotels, shops, and I followed him for around 5 to 6 hours. He carried around 40 kgs on his back. I couldn't do that, it's a mountaineer. At the end of the day, he sold that plastic and he earned an amount which was equivalent to £1. And he took me to a place and he bought me tea and cookies for half of that amount. I never saw him after that, he went away. For me, that £1 represents the poverty of India, and that half pound from which he gave me those tea and cookies represent the generosity of his heart, the peoplehood of India. And after that day, I think for me, environmental issues became interlinked with poverty. And for me, I am studying environmental change and management, and it is difficult for me to not link poverty in developing countries with the environmental issues which are faced in those countries. And this is our moment that as we work towards solving the two problems, poverty and climate change in future, we have to work towards solutions which are inclusive. And Bagun, this person who helped me, who bought me tea and cookie that day, his name is Bagun. Bagun is one of the 800 million people from India. 800 million people. What does that mean? It's a number. 800 million people means double the population of South America. It means population more than Europe. India is not a country, it's a subcontinent. So you cannot have, with those 500,000 villages across rural India, you cannot have one solution that will solve everything. You have to understand the local context and empower local institutions, because without that, you can clean a river, but you cannot sustain that river. So we need to work towards inclusive solutions, strengthening local institutions. And as businesses, what are the colors that we want to leave in this landscape in future? Like, do we want to leave products which don't have an end of life uses? Or do we really want to incorporate the ethos of the SDG 12, responsible consumption and production? Do we really want to inculcate that circular economy concept in our values, that we do not produce anything that has no end use, so that all those lakes and villages, all those lakes and ponds in all these villages are left to our future generations so that kids can really swim in there? And I mean, I'm really like I mean, I used to see clean lakes and rivers as a kid, but now I don't in India. And I think when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, does it really, I mean, I really admire the first, second, and third industrial revolution, which focused on efficiency, but we missed out on equality. So, is the fourth revolution about Bagun? Is the fourth revolution about our environment? Is it just the fourth industrial revolution, or the first authentic, genuine, true, sustainable revolution? Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Simonetta from Venezuela, as it says, and I have to apologize. I'm not going to give you a lovely picture of the world and of India or of Kenya as June and Kapil, because I'm actually a bit angry, and my objective, my aim here today is that you leave this room slightly angry too, but constructively angry. So Davos, we have a problem, or actually two. When I was only 2 years old in 1992, countries met in Rio and signed for the first time a declaration in which they committed to reduce CO2 emissions and tackle global warming. And fast forward, I'm here today, almost 30 years later, shameful. And emissions have doubled, and we have already reached 1 degree of global warming. And why hasn't the international community been able to act? Or why haven't we leaders been more decisive in the action? And this type of failure and inaction is all too familiar to me, because I'm from Venezuela, and you must have heard the disaster that's happening there. But when I was only 8 years old, in 1998, a populist military, Hugo Chavez, won the presidency of my country. And ever since, 20 years have passed, and I have seen an unprecedented destruction of wealth. Venezuela passed from being the country in the region with the best in democratic institutions and with the highest standards of living to a complete failed state, in which in 4 years, the last 4 years, GDP has halved. In 2018, inflation was of 1 million %, and 9 out of 10, that is 90% of Venezuelans didn't have enough income to eat. Why hasn't the international community acted? And why haven't we leaders been more decisive on our action there? So you see why I'm a bit angry. I think, however, there's always lessons to be learned, and I think that there are some lessons in the psychology of inaction in the Venezuelan case that can be useful to understand and to try not to have the same inaction on climate change. And the first is that we must not avoid facts and not avoid worst case scenarios. So if you see a graph of concentration of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, it's actually a pretty cool exponential. And if you see a graph of Venezuelan percentage increase in inflation, it's a pretty cool exponential. And those graphs have nothing in common, except for the fact that there are leaders, world leaders even, that cannot spot the trend, that cannot see the exponential. Or even if the exponential, they can see it, they think the worst case scenario is not probable. Believe me, the worst case scenario is probable. The second lesson I felt I could share was that we must find ways to change behavior when crises are slow motion and self-inflicted. So when the crisis is slow motion, you get to new levels of low, and you get used to it, and you get used to getting worse. And also, when you voted for the bad government, or when you are causing with your everyday actions CO2 emissions, it's really hard to ask people to change behavior. So I haven't figured it out, but we need to figure it out. And third lesson is that collapse happens rapidly after certain thresholds. So we have been fighting in the streets of Venezuela for more than 20 years, the government. And today there's a massive protest called, and I have friends and family who are there, risking their lives in the protest. But the collapse happened only 2 years ago, and it was fast, and it has displaced 10% of the Venezuelan population to the region. And the scientists have warned which are the thresholds we should not pass in climate change. And I think business really need to start investing or continue or like significantly invest on a green transition. Because I wouldn't want to get to that. And I think we should all ask ourselves, are we doing enough to tackle climate change? Please, I beg you, I have seen how a country can collapse for indifference. And I wouldn't want to see the climate to collapse too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. That was great. We're going to continue with our second panel, which really strikes at the core of the Weidenfeld Hoffman Trust, which by definition is about education, and this is what our next panel is about. So please join me in welcoming Ramon Narvaez from Mexico, Dana Harut from Jordan, and Joseph Sentongo from Uganda.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank everyone for being here. My name is Ramon, and I'm from Mexico, and I would like to share with you my experience on why I consider that education, early education of good quality, can be a life jacket when facing tough economic situations. I was lucky enough to be born in a middle-income family in Mexico. That granted me access to really high-quality elementary education. However, everything changed when I was 11. My father got cancer and he passed away, and our economic situation shifted entirely. My mother, who used to be an office assistant, tried to find a job, but since she hadn't worked for 15 years now, and the world had changed a lot in those 15 years, now you need to use computers, you need to have different skills. No one would hire her. She finally managed to get a job at the supermarket. It was a tough job. She even got an injury out of that by carrying boxes of fruits. And she earned about $150 a month. We were far from being the poorest people in Mexico, who I know suffer a lot, but it was a tough situation. We were part of the lowest quintile of income distribution in the country, and I can recall almost every month it was a big struggle even to buy the very basic stuffs at the end of the month. In some period of my life, you need to know that in Mexico it's not safe to drink tap water, but that's what we had to do because we couldn't afford even buying water. Now I'm part of one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and I think most of it's because I got a really high quality elementary education. That pushed me forward throughout my life to seek for good academic institutions and to seek for these kind of opportunities like the Weidenfeld Hoffman Trust have offered me to be here, to be at the University of Oxford. So my final message is investing in education is a wise decision, and it can change lives as it has changed mine. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana. I'm from Jordan. It's a very charming country, very charming people. It's miraculously secure amid regional crisis. However, it has a crisis of its own. It's the gender crisis. Jordan struggles with the third lowest female workforce participation rate in the world. It's at a low of 15% among females compared to 67% among males. The only two countries faring worse than Jordan are Yemen and Syria. So this is This potential is costing the country around 11 billion Jordanian dinars. That's 46% of GDP. And it's a puzzle, because Jordan is also on a very special list of countries where the gender gap in academic measures is actually in favor of girls. So 15-year-old girls are around a third of an academic year ahead of boys in math. They're 1 academic year ahead in science, and around 2 academic years ahead in reading. And if you ask women why it is that they're not entering the workforce, they won't say it's lack of ambition. They do have the ambition, but they say it's childcare. Now, to give you a taste of some well-intentioned sexism from my country, I grew up with people telling me that I don't have to worry about household income. The man is there to provide me with the money and the food. I'm just supposed to take care of the children. Now this mindset around women's employment is actually reflected in our early childhood education enrollment rates. While we celebrate almost universal enrollment rates in primary and secondary education in Jordan, our early childhood education enrollment rates are pretty low. It's 2% for nurseries, and it's 38% for kindergarten 1 and 2. And so this isn't really a government problem, it's not a public sector problem. It's a national problem. It's a cultural problem, more importantly. And when we're tackling solutions like this, I think the target should be society, should be civil society, and it should be culture around women's employment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with you. So, I'm from Uganda, a country of 43 million people. Out of that 43 million, about 7 million are aged between the age of 15 and 24. Why is 15 to 24 important? This is what, according to the ILO, the International Labour Organization, is what we describe as youth. Now, out of Ugandan youth, the Uganda Bureau of Statistics estimates that 80% are currently unemployed. Think of this for a minute. 4 out of 5 young people on the cusp of their prime are without a job. Let's contrast this with Switzerland, for example. The figure is 2%. So we really need to rethink how we engage the youth in not only Ugandan, but all other emerging economies, particularly as we confront the challenges of the 4th Industrial Revolution. This means going beyond just thinking about the creation of jobs, which must be decent jobs, but actually finding ways to enable this young population to be active participants in their economies. My journey in the 3 years since I left Oxford as a Weidenfeld and Hoffman scholar has me confronting these types of challenges on a daily basis. I'll just outline a couple of projects I've worked on, sort of try and address this problem. One of the investments I've been involved in is working on early childhood education in Ghana and in Uganda, trying to build up the cognitive skills of kindergarten-age children, but also importantly, preparing them for school. This means going from merely thinking of educational participation, but rather attainment. And this is building the human capital, thinking about the human capital for 15 years' time. Another investment I've been involved in is is based in Uganda, helping young people gain the business skills and workforce skills and entrepreneurial skills to be able to start their own businesses, which is actually in line with the business innovation session that was on earlier in the stand, trying to equip them with the skills that they need to be able to contribute to the economy. But it goes beyond merely investing in these innovations. We have to find ways to scale them up. There are a lot of good ideas, but they die a natural death. So how do we work with the Ghana Education Service? How do we work with the Ugandan government to try and change the curricula to make them relevant to businesses in the private sector? And that is a challenge we have. So what I'm saying here is that we need to tie quality education, gender equality, the poverty eradication with decent work and economic growth. All these things are intertwined, but we can't leave a generation of young people out of the job market. I just want to leave you with a final point. I personally have benefited from very good early childhood education and very good education throughout my life. But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the support of the Weidenfeld and Hoffman Trust and the Leadership Program. So I hope we can continue to support the trust to nurture the next generation of leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, Dana, and Ramon. Our last panel is going to be about innovation. In this case, we are going to hear from three very recent scholars, which is quite a feat because they have projects that are at the forefront of groundbreaking work. So it's quite a feat with such a young scholarship. We already have many scholars doing this type of work, and it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to them today. That said, please join me in welcoming Atherton Mutomwera from Zimbabwe, Irina Fedorenko from Russia, and Cedric Maforimbo from Zimbabwe as well.
Sergey, thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Atherton. When I was growing up, there were a lot of medicines around the house. And I remember how we used to take the medicines and mix them and pretend to have found the cure for AIDS. And on some days, we thought that we'd test our new cure on the pigeons in the garage. I never had the heart to do that. When I was growing up, my parents were HIV positive. My mother died when I was 4, and my father died when I was 11. And since then, I've dedicated myself to initiatives that increase access to health. So last year, I founded Utano Diagnostics. This is a company that is developing a disease diagnostic and surveillance platform for recurrent viral diseases that affect the African continent. Examples are Ebola and Lassa. Last year, we learned a lesson on just how the incidence of Ebola is increasing. When we thought we had overcome Ebola in the DRC, we learned a week later that we had another outbreak on our hands, and that outbreak is right now threatening to get into a city which is a trading hub and has a population of about 1 million. How the platform we are developing works is that you take blood and you put it on a diagnostic. And within 5 minutes, it tells you what disease the patient has. And then Mark, who is anywhere in the world, will be able to tell who has what disease, where they are located, their GPS, and can also predict where the disease is going to go. Now, the diagnostics platform we're developing is context specific for the African continent. For example, it does not require to be kept in a fridge during transportation and storage. If a diagnostic like the one we're developing now was available during the 2014 Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone, it would have reduced the number of lives lost by a third. It would have also reduced the amount of money spent in that outbreak by a third. Now, I'm really looking forward to the coming month because that's when we're kickstarting off our experiments to develop a proof of concept, which will end in a rapid diagnostic test at the end of the year. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Irina and I come from Vladivostok in the Russian Far East. Despite growing up in the worst economic time in Russia during the 90s in a single parent family and with water and electricity shortages, I always been dreaming big. My first volunteering job was with WWF Russian Far East, and I basically spent all my school years volunteering for the organization, working on conservation, Amur taiga preservation and conservation of forest and leopard. By the age of 19, I was the leader of my own environmental NGO that promoted education for sustainable development. Since then, I decided that all I want to do with my life is to dedicate it to promoting sustainability, stopping climate change, and having scalable, large impact on the natural environment. And I chose to go to one of the best universities in the world, which is Oxford. And I was lucky to be a Weidenfeld-Hoffmann Scholar recipient to pursue my DPhil. While I was in Oxford, the most important time and the most important moment for me was meeting my fellow scholars and community of innovators, community of people who were dreaming big as I was. And in 2014, we started a company which is called Biocarbon Engineering, which uses drones to plant trees. Of course, it's not as simple as that. The system works in 2 stages. First, a mapping drone surveys the environment and comes up with a 3D map of concrete landscape. Then the machine learning algorithm matches that landscape to the database of species and proposes the best, most appropriate pattern to plant in that particular area. And then this pattern is uploaded to the planting drone that flies 2 meters off the ground and either spreads or fires biodegradable seed pods with the seeds. And it's completely automated and it's 10 times faster than human speed and at least twice cheaper. And of course, the implication of this technology are most useful in the areas where humans cannot go, such as swamps in Myanmar, where we are planting mangroves, or decommissioned mining sites in Australia, where we are rehabilitating mines. It's been 2 years since we are now operational, and we completed more than 1,000 of projects, and we are seeing great positive results that are not just restore the environment, but also provide jobs and growth and sustainable development to the local communities. And of course, it's very thrilling to see how these crazy ideas, and of course everyone laughed for the first 2 years at it, and how these crazy ideas come to life. It wouldn't be possible without the support of the scholarship and my fellow cohort students, because the 2 main fears of an entrepreneur is a fear to fail and a fear of not standing up. And this is what the scholarship done for me. Thank you.
My name is Cedric Mafurimbo. I'm from Zimbabwe, and I just want to tell you a story. So it was a summery Southern African day when I embarked on a conservation education trip into the Matobo Hills of Zimbabwe, which some of you know. And as I drove in a 1997 Land Rover Defender through the national park, I looked out my window and I saw a vast expanse of a beautiful plant. Green it was, with yellow, red, pink, and orange flowers. And as I continued through the national park, through the rolling hills, the balancing rocks, and transitioned into the communal lands, my awe of this plant turned into worry. Because in some of the places where I expected to see grazing lands and cropping lands, I continued to see this plant. After I disembarked from my vehicle and spoke to some of the locals, I discovered the true colors of this plant. Not the beautiful colors I've been telling you about, but the true colors of a plant that proliferates furiously through grazing lands, cropping lands, taking up a lot of space, plunging these communities into hunger, reducing their food production, and the true colors of a plant that produces chemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants around it, be they wild plants, be they crops, disturbing the balance of nature because it's all an ecosystem, isn't it? I also discovered that this plant is growing furiously throughout the country of Zimbabwe and in a lot of African countries as well, and throughout the world. and has plunged some of the districts, even in Zimbabwe, to poverty that is close to even in excess of 90%. This plant has also contributed, among many other things, to the loss that Zimbabwe suffered of its title as the breadbasket of Africa, to becoming, unfortunately, the basket case of Africa. This plant is called Lantana Camara, and please note it's not the plant in front of you. But I was very touched and I was determined to find a solution. A few years later, I got into Oxford and I came to study biodiversity conservation, and I was fortunate enough to be a Louis Dreyfus Weidenfeld and Hoffman Scholar. And this scholarship comes with a leadership program under which there is what is called a business challenge. And within this, I grabbed the opportunity with both hands and established what is called the Weeds to Pesticide Project. In this project, I, with a couple of alumni, worked towards fostering the community-based conversion of Lantana Camara into an organic, environmentally friendly pesticide. So this will do several things. This will increase the food that these communities are able to access because it will free up grazing lands and cropping lands. It will bring an income to the communities, alleviating their poverty. It will save the environment from synthetic pesticides, which have caused a lot of harm because it's an organic pesticide, and will also bring back just the balance of nature because it's an invasive plant. You might all be well aware, or most of you might be aware, that in 2017, the long-time leader of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, was overthrown, and there was the rise of Emmerson Mnangagwa as the leader of Zimbabwe. We all waited with much hope. We had a lot of hope that there was going to be positive change, but we haven't seen that hope as yet. Perhaps this is a sign that a lot of the answers to the challenges that we face in Zimbabwe and on the African continent and in developing countries don't only lie in the political leaders that we have in position, but perhaps lie in the grassroots, practical level projects such as mine, which we would need to implement. And so we are not sitting back and waiting for our leaders to righten themselves, but we are taking the bull by the horns, going forward and effecting positive change for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That is the end of our three panels, and we really do hope you have questions. But before that, Mr. Hoffman would like to say a few words, and he has to leave, so we are going to move it up a little bit. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Andrew Hoffman.
Well, very difficult to follow this, of course. I hope you will have questions, and I hope you will sort of play the question and answer game later. I'm afraid I do have to move on to the next meeting. Now, before I say anything, I'd like to thank, in memoriam, George Weidenfeld, who was indeed a remarkable visionary man. But I also would like to underline that I'm not the only person who supports the trust. There are a number of other donors. Why? No, maybe we should ask a question differently. Does it really matter that 30 people go into a top university? Does it really make a difference to the world? Can we really sort of pretend that we are fulfilling our duty as responsible to make the world a better place if we just give 30 young people the opportunity to do something? I believe it matters a great deal. I believe it is something that really is important. One of the inspiration for this is, of course, the Rhodes Trust, and I'm very glad that John is here today to be able to compare notes, because talent is in very rare supply. Finding the right persons, bringing them to a course of this nature, giving them the opportunity to grow in what is, yes, one of the best universities in the world, if not the best, can only lead to positive outcome if this energy is organized and harnessed and pushed in the right direction. The thing that really encouraged me to back up this project is the leadership program. The leadership program, which makes a difference and goes over and above what the teaching of the universities is. It creates a community, it creates a sense of cohort, it creates a sort of yearly cohort, people can talk to each other, but they can also share practices and solutions. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if English graduates would also go for this leadership course. Maybe we wouldn't have the dearth of leadership we have in the UK at the moment. Well, I commend this project to you. I'm very proud of having been able to do it. Rosalie and I are both very supportive of what you're doing. Thank you for doing us so proud today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words, Mr. Hoffman. We are going now to start the Q&A section.
Hi, my name's Oliver Greenfield. I thought that was really inspiring. It touched me in so many different ways. So congratulations, I thought it was absolutely fabulous. Some of the best stuff I've seen this week, to be honest, so that's a good sign. Yeah, Simonetta, yeah, I mean, your anger, you're justified. You're absolutely justified. And it's authentic and it's real. I guess the challenge is, I run the world's biggest green economy network, yeah? And I want to offer youth a chance, but I don't want to do it in a patronising way, because there's a real risk. I was down in South Africa last week, the UN's meeting, they invited a bunch of really experienced students to come to that, and they made them be the people that show the direction to the meeting rooms. It was shocking, you know. I broke all protocol and invited youth into my platform. But we want to give you the platform, we want to give you the thing, we don't want to do it in a patronising way. So what is it that you need to be able to make sure that these conversations or these anger channels into a positive force for change? What is it that you need? Because we would offer it to you if you're clear on it. Thank you.
I think to actually change and to have things doing a bit more than just noise on the media, you need organization, and this could be at the grassroots level, and then like building up to actually go to world conferences. Possibly, yes, investing in doing small organizations. I would do something bottom up again, like Paris bottom up. Seems to work better on environment, and the things Kapil was saying, it's very localized, the environmental issues in each place. And then the other thing I would say, what else do we need? I am a believer that also change comes from within business, and I don't feel that only climate angry, that it's too often politicized and becomes something like, actually we're talking about against capitalism and against all forms of consuming. And I think that type of anger is actually not useful, because I think that we also need more business intelligence, more business, how to actually be able to change the business model, make it circular, make it sustainable, as also June was saying, I think a better understanding of the business and how we could transform business or make it really innovative from within, that would be useful. I think I'm getting some of it from Oxford, but I think I would love to see it more institutionalized and not like the MBA simple same business model, but like actually innovation within the business, how to transform it. I think those two things, but maybe after a while I'll think better and have a more articulate response, so I'll grab your details.
Hi, my name is Katja Speck, and I was very inspired by all of you. I think you are change makers, and I absolutely agree. There's a lot of hope. There was a panel this morning, Christiana Figueres asked at the very beginning, how much hope do you have that we tackle the climate crisis between 1 and 5? After listening to you, my hope went up. Thank you.
I'm really very impressed by all the presentations, and I think that the leadership program, which Andre mentioned, and what you all mentioned, is really key. We do a lot of work in scholarships, and scholarships isn't just the money for the tuition, the money for the living and room and board. It's really these programs being developed around that. And I noticed some of the comments people found that was a really good part, equal, or at least a strong part of your education. And I think we see today in almost every country a lack of leadership, maybe except for Germany, but even she's going to change. So. My question is to Irena. Sorry, Irena. There's always good things and bad things, but you're going to put a lot of Canadian students out of work, because Canadian students used to go up north and put saplings in with trees. Do you see that as a potential with your program to go in more temperate climate trees? It's a great program.
The reality is that just the commitment of 200 million hectares
that already been signed for restoration by the government, the New York Declaration on Forest, the Bond Challenge, all the COPs, just to restore that. That's the size of India.
So I wasn't criticizing.
Yeah, no, I
I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Can you do saplings as well?
No, it's on the seeds. So to restore the size of India at the pace that we're currently doing it, and the forest restoration hasn't changed from the Iron Age. So since the invention of the shovel, no innovation happened in the forestry space. And to do that, it will take us 200 years. So we don't have this time.
Hi everyone, again Yusuf Kobo from A Seat at the Table. I want to congratulate all speakers. I was so inspired and moved by so many of you. It felt like every next person had a more amazing story, a more inspiring story. In my line of work, what I have learned throughout the years is sometimes you need to listen to the younger generation. They think out of the box, they're more innovative, they're doing so many things right. So my question to any scholar that wants to take this question is, in regards to your countries and your projects, what are the baby boomers doing wrong?
I worked with a brilliant colleague at the Queen Rania Foundation who came up with this amazing public-private partnership model where you can provide childcare services in rural areas at a very affordable cost. At the time, we had a very, very old Minister of Education who kept refusing the idea every single time, even though there was a very viable solution and like there was funding, etc. It was the same person who actually inspired a lot of the business leaders in Jordan who recognized that the reason why there aren't affordable childcare services, especially at companies where women could work, is because the companies can't afford it, because they're predominantly micro, small, or medium-sized enterprises. And so one of the solutions that we're thinking of, and it was also an idea that was inspired through the leadership program at the Weidenfeld Hoffman Trust, was geographically clustered, crowd-funded nurseries where small to medium-sized enterprises could subscribe to a particular scheme that's commensurate with the number of female employees that they have, well, actually female and male, because they also have a role in childcare, employees who would benefit from these childcare services. And this is an idea that this is a missing market. It's beyond me why it is a missing market in Jordan, even though it's in our labor law that they have to provide workplace creches, but no one complies. And it's something that we're working on under the the business challenge in the Weidenfeld Hoffman Trust.
I am from Colombia. I think that the difference is that my country in this moment is like the representation of hope. And if to answer the question of what I think we've done, like to get to the point where now, like we're not a perfect country at all, but I think we're a much better country than the one where I was born 28 years ago. So what have we done? We have bring to the conversation all the different members and all the different targets. We don't have our leaders talking in one side and our businessmen talking in the other. We're working together and we're bringing to the public sector these good practices that has been developed in the private sector. And I think that's also a very important answer to the question, like how can we just start this conversation, for example, about environment. And I think it's in that way, bringing diversity to the conversation, not only about public and private sector, but also this kind of diversity of geographies. So thank you very much.
We have another answer to that question. In the meantime, I'm going to be, if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll give you a mic. Thanks.
You need to get your hands dirty, you know, like before you work into policy, before you work on target, you need to understand how implementation works. So all the bureaucrats, all the policymakers, without any implementation background, just jump into policy. And how will you really understand when you don't really interact with people? You need to immerse in communities. You need to understand for whom you want to work. If I'm standing here, it's because like I have a choice, you know, I have freedom in my life to be a part of a business, to be a part of civil society, to join government. If I value my freedom, if all of you value your freedom in life, then you should also value the freedom of poor people. You should see them as active agents of change. You should not give them just a solar cooker or a toilet and see, we have achieved the target. You should empower them. You should extend, like this is something which is relevant to the work of Professor Amartya Sen, that extend freedom of people, see them as active agents of change, reduce their deprivations. then only you will have a multiplier effect, something which is tangible.
I regularly chide Indian business owners who are very significant in the world today and who I know personally quite well about the fact that if they don't start to address the 800 million rural poor in India and just focus, if indeed the country is growing, then they're not taking responsibility. Now, yesterday, so we live in a world of reconcentration of wealth, declining middle classes in some significant parts of the world, paralyzed politics, and big business has a far bigger share of the pie. We've sort of regressed in the last 40, 50 years, and like you, I get very angry as I look around the world. Now, yesterday, Andre Hoffman, and this is why I sort of said I better take the mic, because not all hope is lost. Hoffman have put 50 million euros into INSEAD to create a new institute. As you tie this sort of initiative and scholarship program that brings wonderful people like yourselves, into the frame to take positions in the world in public policy especially, and business does its bit through a re-education, whatever age, through the YP or whatever, maybe we get a bit of a result.
What it has struck me from all your presentations, and I just maybe invite a couple of you and you self-select to comment, is that you all seem to be leaning towards either to become an entrepreneur or create your own thing. I haven't heard a lot of you commenting on, I want to work for the UN, or I want to work for the private sector and change it from within, or I want to go into philanthropy and work with a massive civil society organization like WWF, or others. And it just struck me, is it do you feel that the new young generation feel that there is just nothing in the infrastructure out there that appeals to you and can be a platform for how you want to change the world? Or is there anything that we can do to appeal to come and work for us? Because we need that energy and that passion, and we cannot all be entrepreneurs. Maybe not. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's funny that you mentioned entrepreneurship, because in Belarus, every single person believes that you either born an entrepreneur or you're not. You either have it or you're not. No one believes that you can actually nurture your skills and become an entrepreneur. And I think that the same is with leadership. And I also thought so. I also believe that, well, I don't feel that I'm an entrepreneur. But when I came to Oxford and we started our Enterprise Challenge, so within the leadership program we have the Enterprise Challenge, when we create our own entrepreneurial projects. And through the series of workshops and seminars and discussions, I felt that I opened up. I felt that you can actually do your own thing, and it's actually possible. It doesn't matter whether you was born with it or without it. And well, I don't know how my other fellow scholars feel about it, but as I wanted to work I think it's two different things. When you work in international organization, you still, even at the policy level, you still have this sort of a ceiling from the directors, from people higher than you. But in entrepreneurial sphere, you don't have this limit to your ideas. And I think that is why many of our scholars who spoke today tend to choose entrepreneurial path.
What I told in my story is what drives me now, and I think that the best way to have an amazing impact on the life of other people, it's through those channels, government or international institutions. So I think there is a slight disenchantment, especially with government, with young people.
Let's leverage on technology to actually be able to spread some of the initiatives you might have or the lessons you have learned in Oxford. Because, everyone believes we're at that continent down there, so we ship you to Europe to learn a bit, and then when you come back, some of you do come, some don't come, which is a problem. So we believe you need also to come back and help us solve these problems. But in the meantime, let's use technology to be able to disseminate some of the lessons or learnings you have to the community back home so that we solve those problems.
We actually do ask our scholars when we offer them a place that they sign up to going home. That is part of what we do. So we very much encourage them to go home. And I can tell you that they are going home and they will go home.
Thank you very much for coming. This has been a very enriching experience, and the conversation is just starting. So let's start.